great to see you. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you. I'd never been on one of these live streams before. That's kind of exciting.
I'm
Thanks
looking
for having
forward
me.
to it. No, you come. I'm sure you've just come in cold. We're so happy to have you on the show. We're talking all things defense and dual use. I'd love a
Love it.
little bit of flavor and context on Jack and Project A.
Yeah, sounds good. We're a generalist VC fund, despite sort of our historical defense tech investments. We backed, I think, 8 companies in defense tech that are all military facing. Most of the founders have a military background. But despite all of that, we are a generalist VC. We've been around for about 12 years, have managed about 1.3 billion under management, so fairly established at that. Teams in Berlin, London, Munich. I'm part of the London office. We have basically half the team here, actually. And yeah, we invest in honestly everything from AI to logistics and everything else. And it wasn't until probably 2.5 years ago in 2022 that Uwe, who's a general partner here, and he is a captain in the German Air Force, and myself, I come from more of a technical background, bioinformatician by training, build high frequency trading systems, and spend a good amount of my time in sort of growth investing, actually, on the more deep tech side. We stumbled upon quantum systems. And at Series A in 2022, it was a company that was very easily passable by most
Hmm.
VCs, but given, ironically, just our backgrounds with Uber and I, we spent a lot more time looking deeper into it, and we said, "Hey, this is actually an amazing investment."
What did you see there?
Um,
What was you saw in quantum systems?
yeah, this is interesting. So most investors today, which is like the VC textbook thinking here, which is, hey, you're selling to governments, which is long
Hmm.
sales cycle. Your hardware, which means you're capex intensive, so we don't want to back that, right? Those two things will usually make a normal Series A, most VCs, but like pre-seed, seed, Series A, will usually run away from that.
Hmm.
And then, fun enough, so if you look into it a bit deeper, the government revenue they had at that time in 2022, keep in mind that this is also when the war just started,
Hmm.
was actually the German MOD and US DoD buying these out of aid packages and effectively airdropping them, sorry, like figuratively, logistically dropping them in Ukraine. So there wasn't like a big procurement cycle as one would expect. It was actually very, very fast. And the governments back then were paying these upfront.
Ah,
Yeah, so there wasn't even like even the capital efficiency was amazing.
clear.
And then you look through the financial profile of the drones, right? Which is people expect to be low margins, hardware, and it's not because they're all military specification, they're high specs. The margins were somewhere between 50 to 60%.
Hmm.
And at the same time, yes, you have to manufacture these drones, but they already had a deadline for working capital with one of the bigger European investment banks already. So the capital efficiency between the margin profile and how much the customers were paying upfront for these
Hmm.
was actually incredible for just any business, let alone a hardware business. So people, a lot of VCs passed. You spend a bit of time on this. That's what happened. We invested, of course, along with Peter Thiel and Thiel Capital. And then fast forward to this year to become a unicorn literally a couple of months ago, early this year, in Series C, thanks to Polleton. So since then, Uwe and I looked at each other and said, what else looks like this in the
Hmm.
European tech market? And we backed everyone from Axe Robotics. We spun up Stark as well, basically internally. And then also Lapis, Project Q, and another 3 companies that is in stealth at the moment that are all military facing. And it's been most of these companies doing tremendously well in
This
this
is
market.
really interesting. I want to go right back to the beginning for a short moment. How does someone coming from a mathematics background get into venture?
Me personally,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, it's a question. I wanted to be a VP of product at Monzo originally when I was in business school. They didn't want me, but then when I did see the first round of crowdfunding open up.
Hmm.
And the reason why I worked at Monzo was because when I came to London for my graduate school, no one would give me a bank account. I'm sure maybe you've been there. It
Yep.
was you don't have a place to live, you need a bank account. You don't have a bank account, you don't have an address, so no one will give you anything from Monzo. And before this, I spent enough time as a techie in sort of fintech that I knew how hard it was to build this fintech stack. So I put a bit of my tuition money into the first round of the crowdfunding round of Monzo when I was
Hmm.
still at school because I thought it was an amazing product. And by the time I graduated, despite not able to work on Monzo, that investment actually paid for my degree on paper.
No
And I
way.
said, "Is this on paper though?" That being said, and I asked myself, is this a career? Is that can I make a living out of doing stuff? Keep in mind that I spent a lot of my life, most of my life in Australia, and then a couple of years in the US, but working for Amazon is more of a high tech role, right? So I was not that familiar with startups and venture capital. A recruiter said, yes, it is a job. Would you like to interview and so forth? So that's how I actually landed in the venture capital industry. It's by sheer ignorance almost, actually. It's probably the right word.
Ignorance is usually the best
Yeah.
bet, especially when you're making contrarian bets like quantum systems, right?
Yeah, I like to think so. But we'll see how things turn out with everything that we do. Yeah.
How do you cement that contrarian thesis that you've obviously been investing in since 2022? And this dual use, this application of dual use, was it obvious after quantum systems, or did it become obvious after you kept making investments and then paying off?
Yeah, so we didn't, to be fair, I didn't actually know what dual use was when we backed quantum systems. That concept was the label of which existed and never looked
Hmm.
too much into it. But what was happening that was clear was that quantum at that time had half its revenue also from commercials, which had also shorter sales cycles, smaller ACVs, right? So it's kind
Clear.
of bootstrapping the longer term government things, which closed more recently back from them, which has a long sales cycle as well, of course. It was bootstrapping those with some of these commercial customers, but also aid money, right? So as in like MOD aid money to Ukraine. Um, that was actually what dual use was back then. It was simply revenue bootstrapping. Now, today, I think that term has taken a whole another meaning. Instead of like means defense tech, but also means some VCs who don't want to do more offensive capabilities tend to label their defense investors dual use. So that today it's become more of a label. But the spirit of dual use is mostly actually a mechanism for capital efficiency for these companies that do sell to the government in some way or form.
Does it make for a strong bet to take if they're dual use versus just military applications solely?
It depends the patience of the investor, I think fundamentally. Like venture capital traditionally has like when you're a founder, you raise venture capital, you expect another round to happen within 18 to 12, 24 months, traditionally, right? That's the
Hmm.
runway you raise for, and that corresponds to the mental feedback cycle of most investors. Now, historically, government procurement before Ukraine and Russia never met that timeline, that you could not see any signals of a clear buy signal within 2 years. Now, fast forward to today, after the various global conflicts, various drones flying above European airspace, that buying signal from most European militaries have been shortened to just a couple of months. They all have accelerated innovation programs. They all have various actual properly publicized programs for technology. Might it be drones, might it be some of the software things, right? You could find multiple entry points for your technology as a founder
Hmm.
today. Most Western European military websites even, and it's very publicly. So that signal cycle has shortened to well within venture capital signal range that future investors can actually look at these and go, yeah, we see that you got traction. We want to invest in the next round. That just never happened before, probably until the most recent 2 years.
You're getting in at such an early stage. Obviously, Project A pre-seed, it's generalist, but pre-seed up to Series A.
Yeah,
And with these specific dual use companies, how do you think about the exit strategy? Because obviously your capital is locked up for a considerable period of time. And maybe you're
yeah,
sending them off in secondaries downstream, but the real value is obviously owning double digit ownership by the time they IPO,
absolutely.
right? How do you think about that with what happens after Ukraine ends or the war ends?
Yeah, so I think there's a race, not just for us, but every dual use founder or even defense tech founder out there, forget the use for the time being, that there is a race to sort of diversify your technology or
Right.
diversify your revenue stream away from Ukraine. I.e., not that you don't sell to Ukraine, but the opposite you do, right? There's always been a proven people see your operations in Ukraine as a capability lighthouse. I.e., are you live there? If you are, especially military customers, tell us more about it.
Hmm.
Sometimes they ask for reports about how the Ukraine brigades are working with the technology. So all of our companies are live in Ukraine. The ones that are more publicly mature enough, they're all live in Ukraine today, for
Hmm.
example. Um, but from a revenue mix perspective, there is obviously a risk that that revenue could go down. It probably wouldn't be like sort of acutely so, but it's definitely, and we hope the war does stop, to be honest with you, that there will be a slower revenue from purchases from Ukraine. So the race has always been that you prove enough traction from a technology perspective in Ukraine to sell to the broader NATO forces, maybe some other countries as well, sort of in the allied sphere of things. And the race is really on for that. There is a
Hmm.
time to this. We all hope the war stops. Sometimes it looks like it is. And that's what all of the founders in defense tech today should be thinking about. Now, I will say from our experience, the amount of companies that have very high exposure to Ukraine is getting lower and lower every day. Like
Really?
mostly because of the wider NATO level procurement I talked about earlier. That
Hmm.
domestic NATO defense forces do want to buy this technology. So that is offsetting some of the Ukrainian revenue that is coming in.
When we think about the
Offsetting is the wrong word, but over balancing. Yeah.
when we think about the global landscape of like the fractionalization of the world at this point in time and how supply chains have been hit, which has fueled innovation, which gives us the
Mm.
position we are today, and now we're potentially moving away and diversifying those revenue streams. Do you feel that like they're not just going to be selling to these our allies, these NATO blocks, but actually the innovations that they've made internally in the company will spin out into other products?
Um, Potentially. I mean,
Mm.
that seems to be if you look at how DARPA started in the US, and even just NASA, right? That seems to be the case. Um, we, listen, the things that we invested in, the technology wise, and some of the startups that we see in the market, is probably less that. I think there was an era of NASA and DARPA, and even sort of the kind of technology that Incutel backs. Incutel is basically the US DoD's VC fund. And if you look at their portfolio today, it's a bit more balanced between direct defense and sort of deep tech, right? And
Hmm.
this is sort of also the fees of the NATO Innovation Fund. We probably see less tech applied to defense, and more honestly just direct founders building for defense directly without sort of having to use deep tech angle. That being said, there's a lot of like funds out there. Someone like NATO Dana, for example, right, whose business is sort of mostly that. There's definitely a lot of interest. Whereas, like I think more than ever now, we see founders just honestly just building for the military without too much of a science angle, just purely for the military.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, do you think?
Uh,
From
from from what
and
perspective? I was gonna ask.
yeah, I was about to say, right, because it's a very open-ended question. I,
Yeah.
is it a good thing or a bad thing for innovation?
I think it depends on how you see the world, so to speak, from a very philosophical point of view.
How do you see the world?
I see it as deterrence. I just see it as simple deterrence. I believe in game theory. I believe that, unfortunately, and I'd like this not to be true, but unfortunately, it seems like equality and deterrence is the only thing that's stopping us from, something dramatic to humanity in terms of maybe nuclear war. Like nuclear weapons have been that for the last,
Hmm.
50 years or so. This is probably more of a technological incrementality to that escalation.
Hmm.
That instead of investing in nuclear weapons, which is something we're not, well, you know what I mean, but that more conflicts is driven by sort of these robotics drones type of kind of weaponry, right? So in that sense, I think the deterrence nature of just global military seems to remain exactly what it is. And therefore, if I believe in that, it's better having a deterrence than not having deterrence.
On the drone front that you mentioned, with a lot of the market being focused and concentrated in drone startups, where do you think it goes from there? Because do we need another drone company?
I think so. I mean, sorry, my AirPod just ran out of battery, so bear with me. I'm changed to my speakers. Let me know
It's
if you
okay.
can't hear
No,
me.
this is perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so it's live. Um, I think production capability is something that's underestimated a lot, right? So, for example, every time I tour a drone company today, there's rarely a production line. Like when people call it a factory, what they really mean is more of a workshop. That there's people lining up
Interesting.
everywhere.
So there isn't
Yeah,
a
like a
physical
BMW
line.
line. Yeah, exactly. So if you imagine your automotive manufacturer lines that you see on TV in Germany or France or wherever, that there's robotics putting things together. No, it's very far away from that. Very, very far away. There's usually just people constructing modular equipment together by hand. Now, is that because there isn't enough volume to warrant such a production line? Potentially. But if you do imagine that there is a front on Eastern Europe, not even Western, but let's say Eastern Europe, there's not enough production capability to meet that. If we look at the drones, amount of drones that's being used in Ukraine today, every day, and you take that as like a benchmark to sort of, the multiple fronts you have in Eastern Europe, just not enough drones like for a long time to make that, especially with the production capability today, right? So are there enough drone companies? Maybe, but production-wise, it's still very limited. And I think a lot of that depends on the military budgets of the next years, right? Are they buying capacity? Are they buying optional capacity, more interestingly, just kind of or are they really stockpiling existing technology? And also keep in mind that without a war, the technology also gets quite stale over a period of time. So, which is probably why they want to chunk their.
But the consumer applications of drones, do you not feel that like long term it supersedes the military applications, the only military applications? Because if we look at Amazon and oh god, it's not Deliveroo, it's the other one. Thinking
Air
about
Prime?
yeah, I think in the US it's Air Prime, or in the UK they were getting regulations to fly drones and drop food, right? When we look at that, the market there is gigantic.
For sure. Yes. How do I put this? The military drones are not subject to much civilian regulations, effectively, right? In that if you use this for military purposes, for the most part, you could fly, certain direction towards enemy, but that's really it. For a lot of things you describe, a lot of that depends on civilian aviation regulations. Those are less predictable, I think, generally so. They are definitely moving in the right direction for better economics on e-commerce delivery, right? For example, that this is happening. You see some of these tests in Japan, in the US, and so forth, China, right? Even. But it is definitely a different pace of innovation because of the regulatory bodies above it. And to be fair, living in an urban environment, both you and I would probably prefer the CAA in the UK to regulate some of these things because we have someone's parcel drop on our head walking down the street, right? So it does make sense that there's level of regulation, but that's also what's probably causing the innovation to not happen as fast as it is.
What's the way to unlock that innovation for the companies you're currently invested in right now? Is it regulation needs to be slightly loosened? Is it more capital? Is it something else?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any companies we invested in sort of what we call a resilience thesis that is dependent on civilian regulation. I don't think there actually is, and it's almost not by accident because we're purposefully going after the founders that are building for the military and primarily the military as well. In the sense that not many of our companies today heavily reliant on a commercial non-military revenue stream for their traction. Yeah.
Clear. Look, I want to completely switch gears for one moment. I'm a big fan of Star Trek, right? But not so big fan of Star Wars. Which way do you lean?
I've seen both.
Everyone it's one or the other typically.
Yeah, I like the depth of Star Wars in terms of their the stories and everything else, but I like the breadth of the universe of Star Trek. If I had to pick, I'd probably say Star Trek.
Star Trek, so you're a socialist like me.
Is that what I mean? I don't know why. I like the concept of a society where you evolved beyond money, right? That you're joining Starfleet for the sake of exploration, for the sake of better humanity or the Federation, or whatever. I like that concept of which that is not so much, local sociality constraints. I like that idea.
When you look at the companies you're investing in today with Labris, Arc Robots, Project Q coming up, do you think about that future?
As in consciously to reach that future?
Yes.
If you want to go that deep, scarily sometimes, but not for the good reasons, in the sense that I'm not sure how much of a Trekkie you are, but they evolved to that because they had a sort of Fourth World War, right? And that's when the warp drive was invented and the Vulcans came and so forth, right? Sorry, this is a weird podcast, but you know what I mean? So it took a huge war to let that happen, right? Like that's terrifying. And it seems like I'm hoping not, but it seems like the world's kind of going that way a little bit, which is why I do think deterrence, at least I take the deterrence point of view, right? But Yes, but unfortunately, maybe that's what it takes to reach that level of enlightenment. I hope not. I really, 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 really hope not. But it's terrifying to think about because that's literally how Star Trek started. If you look at all the flashback ones, yeah,
It's very weird that we live in this fractionalized world today where we're on that cusp of world war again. The reality of the situation is we don't want to be in that.
absolutely.
When we think about the robotics companies in Europe right now, obviously,
Mm.
you're thinking, in the back of the mind, we're thinking about Star Trek and that future. We don't want to end up, fighting a war to get there. But today, in the companies that we're investing in, do you think Europe has the talent for robotics compared to the US or compared to China?
Um, I think Europe has a stronger engineering base,
Right.
just as strong of an engineer base. And when I say engineer, I mean that in the production hardware sense of it all.
And
I
we're
think,
really in the age of the engineer. Do you see that?
yeah, because I mean, as much as sort of AI is improving candidly, entry-level white collar jobs improving, I mean, sort of,
Yep.
somewhat replacing as well, to be honest with you. Um, those engineering production roles, industrial engineering, even more the hard tech stuff from hypersonic platforms, right? Those are not yet there, not by any means. And if I look at the capability gap between the US, China, and Europe, that's kind of where Europe is lacking, right? For example, even just simple things like counter UAVs that you see Israel simply, not simply, but Israel shoots. You've seen these videos where the Iranian drone flies to Israel and Israel shoots up their
The
missiles
Iron
and
Dome.
various things. Iron Dome, exactly. Iron Beam, Iron Dome, the whole suite. We don't have that here. Sorry, it's evident in the last couple of weeks that we don't have that here, right? And I had so many, I had maybe about 5 or 6 startups this week pitching me some kind of pre-seed counter UAV solutions that didn't exist the week before us.
How does one even begin to think about building an Iron Dome over Europe?
Now, or the European version is the drone war, right? Basically, is what they're going to PR. Um, it's not, it's absolutely plausible, is my rough assessment of things.
How does it become plausible?
Um, let me know if this is too long, much of a detail, but basically Iron Dome in itself in the US, between US and Israel in the 2010s, late 2000s, costed about 1 to 2 billion to build the whole system they have, which is roughly a missile with a very fast propulsion system, a multi-sensor fusion, with a warhead that synchronizes to a global radar of some kind. That's roughly the stack of most counter UAV systems. Um, Unlike strike drones, which hits usually stationary targets or at most, walking vehicle speed targets on the ground, an interceptor drone, like the ones in Iron Dome, let's call it a drone, let's call it a missile, let's say the line's getting very blurred, right?
Hmm.
It needs to hit a three-dimensional object, which is Shaheeds, traveling at 300 to 400 kilometers an hour in three-dimensional space, sometimes in the night and not even daytime.
Hmm.
So the amount of sensor you have for that, the amount of compute you have for that, the amount of time it takes for you to lift off or warm up your engines.
Hmm.
And this is why you often see counter drones shoots out of canisters, which is
Yep.
pressurized. Yeah, it decreases the time it takes to accelerate that initial phase, right? And there's also arguments to be made between turbojets and electric propulsion on the actual propellant. And then obviously the software that synchronizes between edge compute and global, like so the global radar sends a intercept vector, but once you get close enough, your local sensors has to adjust for a proximity
In
detonation
real
for
time.
in real time, in very low latency requirement real time environments.
Hmm.
That specific thing, right? So with everything I just said, building one of these interceptors is just going to cost a lot more money than the drones that they're intercepting.
Right.
Simple technical maths, right? Simple technology requirements, cost maths. Um, and it costed basically US and Israel $1 to $2 billion to do this back in the day. I would argue, though, it is very much possible if you imagine everything I just said, and especially on the compute and sensor side today in 2025, to build this again from scratch, it will cost probably a fraction of that. And that is within the realm of venture capital backable scale. It's actually not that crazy.
And so it actually
That's
becomes
to
something that
say,
could happen. It's just not in the way that we would have thought it.
Right. And it's not quite, of course, all the primes also building this as well, right? So there's a lot of research going on to the space, everything from interceptor drones as well, lasers very short range, for example. But what it's looking like is that the technology capabilities looks very similar to Israel, where there's different ranges of sensors, different range of interceptor methods. If you're within 1 to 2 kilometers, you probably be right now. It looks like the direct energy lasers is actually the future for that range. But if you're beyond 20 to 50 kilometers, an actual interceptor drone needs to fly out and intercept it. But all in all, it's definitely cheaper than spinning up F-35s, which is kind of what we're doing now every time something flies in, which is expensive.
Expensive to fuel, expensive to build, expensive to maintain.
Right. But if you imagine the coverage area of, let's say, Tel Aviv or Israel extending along the eastern flank, it's going to cost a lot of money, but from a technical perspective, it's not impossible. It's almost plausible that if you want to do that, you could do that. It's just going to be really, really expensive. But it's not like, going to Mars expensive.
Not going to Mars. That seems like an expensive affair right now.
Yeah, but you know what I mean, right? Like it's capable and it's technology for it. So I do think that there's certain critical paths that could be viable for just European defense in general.
Look, before we let you go, obviously, Project A is one of the top investors in European defense and defense applications since 2024, with rounds since 2019 being 12, rounds since 2024 being 8. How does that feel? Great?
I wish the world wasn't what it is today, to be honest with you. I wish things were better from a geopolitical point of view, from a conflict point of view. So we're not, how to put this, we're not actively out there to make money from wars. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And I do believe in deterrence for the most part, as I mentioned before, and maybe all the Star Trek universe, right, as well. That things will hopefully be enlightened that way. I do think that we are providing a capability that our adversaries already have. And that's pretty evident from
It's
even
very
just
evident.
today, right? So we're not providing it. We're helping startups and founders to build those more precisely.
And I feel that
So I think that's a good thing, generally.
There's a misunderstanding in the fact that you are quite literally fueling an ecosystem that has been underserved for a considerable period of time.
Yes, potentially. I think a lot of the technology companies that we back today in defense are overlooked by those primes that, to be fair, like I don't think a startup can necessarily build a, environmental quality tank over a period of 5 years. That's very hard to do, right? But some of these drone things, because they're building tanks, the drones are a bit less attractive to them as projects. But I keep saying that, even a small outcome in the relatively vastness of the defense industry does mean a very good startup and venture capital outcome.
Jack, before we let you go, there's one question we love to ask VCs, or two questions we'd like to ask VCs on the show. It's a bit of a quick fire round for you. What are two companies that aren't in the portcos of Project A that are valued under $250 million that you believe are going to be generational defining companies?
One or two of these?
What are two of these companies that aren't inside of the portfolio companies of Project A?
Yeah, and it's valued under 250 million.
Yeah.
Interesting. I think Frankenberg in Estonia could be one of those. Because they've been at this game, they've been at a counter UAV game earlier than most people, to be honest with you. They are based in Estonia and they have a lot of strong traction in the Baltics region, which is on the front lines, right, so to speak, if there's ever Article 5 that's triggered. And they've been iterating on their product longer than everybody else has, I think. And Estonia, if I've ever been there, the environment there is very, like, this stuff is very front of mind, for example, to them, right? So I think that could be one of the companies. And another company, which I'm still yet to find, I'll make it interesting, is something to do with energy sovereignty. So we backed a company called Hades in geothermal and potentially critical minerals. I think there's more companies out there that would honestly ensure both European energy sovereignty, and Europe still buys quite a bit of natural gases from Russia despite everything. And also the amount of compute that is required and most of the AI capabilities today. You see everybody building nuclear power plants almost in the US again, right? We're seeing pictures like this in the US. It's kind of crazy. Something along those lines, because I do think that energy, I think, is the last sovereign atomic unit of energy is the last atomic unit of sovereignty. if that makes sense.
That does make
That
perfect sense. I've never
can't
thought
demo.
about it in that perspective, but you're right. It's the only thing that it is the last thing that we can control that is within a country.
Yeah. So maybe it's a fusion company out there. Maybe, and I'm sure there are the big ones are above 250 million, but fusion could be one of those potential solutions.
All right,
So,
last one. I won't keep you too long. You're
yeah,
going to go
man.
back to
Yeah.
investing in the future.
No, sorry, man.
VCs, I find, are incredible deep thinkers, as you've shown today, right? And you think about the future, you think about the world. And we had Ferdinand on from Super C talking in a similar vein to what we're talking about today. I didn't get to ask him, but I'm going to ask you, which venture capitalists do you look at in the past and not emulate their work, but look at their investment thesis, think about, like, review how they've looked at the world and respect how they thought and the investments that they've made?
That's a good question. I think of all the funds and the people that I rate sort of in that, and keep in mind that I'll be super honest, I'm probably not a hypey investor. I don't subscribe to a lot of these, sort of some VCs do that. They network super well, right? They're always out there. They have a good brand, personal brand out there talking to generalist founders and so forth. I kind of take a very different approach. I go very deep on a few different things that I like, and I hope I know a bit better. That's all. I try to, work with the founders in those spaces to really get to form the thesis together with them. And once in a while, I'll back one or few of these wonderful people as well, right? I get lucky to back them. So my style of investing is very different to that of the other spectrum of folks. So with that in mind, I want to say probably 83 North,
Yeah,
which is not a very, they're very low key on their brand.
very low key.
Very low key. But they make some amazing investments with their records. And if you ask them, they always have a very clear, concise, non-hype driven thesis that when and if they do talk about why they invested, you're like, wow, I never thought of it that way before, but that's exactly how things played out. So if there's more idolizations, probably I would, it's actually be that fund as opposed to a Sequoia, which are also wonderful people, right? Of course, I'm sure very smart
I
people
love that
doing
they've Sequoia benchmark A16Z. You can see the track
Yeah, they're all
record
great,
there.
and they all have records to prove that, right? But if your question was, who do I emulate to be, then I should be someone like an 83 North.
Jack, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for talking defense with me. It's
No
a
problem.
touchy topic
No
from time
problem.
to time, but it seems like you're making the right bets here.
Thank you, mate. Thanks for having us.
Pleasures as always. Speak to you soon.
Take care. Bye.